Hey guys, well, welcome to another Known Experience podcast. It is my pleasure today to be sitting here with my buddy John and also Justin McRoberts, all the way from the West Coast, which I just returned from yesterday. Actually, I was in San Francisco area. Justin and I kind of connected way back in the beginning of my coffee journey.
Way back.
Yeah, way back. I don't know, 15 years. And now we're here, but he's one of those guys. When John and I were talking about who we wanted for the first 10 guests, I was like, I would really like Justin because he's just one of those guys that has a lot to say and it usually has worth, right? And he's pretty concise. So
I try.
He would be a good guy that could offer a lot. So welcome, my man. It's good to have you
Happy
here.
to be here, dude. Thanks for having me. Sincerely.
Yeah, absolutely. John, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Good to be here. Good to see Justin and I were just catching up because we both worked in the music industry in the same space in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it's always fun to see where life goes from there. But great to see you again. And just say it's been great to watch your journey. And you just said a lot of things that have been really refreshing to me at a season in my life where I felt like I wasn't sure if I had a tribe. And to hear people say things that you go, them too. That's really awesome.
Good.
So thank you for what you do in that. Yeah.
So what you post almost every day. It'll be 5 lines, and it started, I want to say, about a year ago. And I don't know if I'm right, but
a little more than that. But yeah,
okay.
A while ago. Yeah.
So is that on purpose, right? In a world that's kind of just throwing a lot of content, you wanted to really condense it and say, here it is, think about it, but it's just a little.
Yeah. So there's a ton there. So
Okay.
So I talk a lot. I always have. So when back when I met you and when John and I met forever ago, I was playing a lot of music, and if I was playing a 60 to 75 minute set, I was probably talking for like 35 minutes at least.
Right.
I'm a storyteller.
Right.
And that's not bad. If you do it well, it's fine.
Yeah.
What I've come to for me personally is I know what it is that I want to say, and I just get used to talking. And so like adding words becomes it's sort of the natural. I've done this. And so you add a little extra, and then you add a little extra. So like, and we all know this, like the same story you used to tell that was like a 4-minute story is now this 15-minute thing. And there's a dragon in the middle of it. Like where did that come from? The personal practice was, what are you actually trying to say? So that if I have more of an elaborate story, that's great. But I know what it is. I wanted to learn to boil things down to like, this is more concise. Yeah. Secondly, I don't have a ton of time. I don't want to, like, once in a while I'll read something longer form. And so if I want to meet people where they are and be online, I want to be able to say like, here's a thing. This takes a moment for you to get into your brain, which actually goes to the last thing. What I've come to figure out believe is like, I can do everything within my power to bring the best of what I've got in story, in teaching, maybe in music, a little less that now. But the real ball game is what's going on in the hearts and the minds, souls, lives of listeners, readers. Like, it's what's going on in you that counts. And when I talk too much, it's almost always because I'm trying to control the outcome instead of trusting the people I'm talking to. So instead of me trying to take someone from point A all the way to point G and every stop in between, I'm learning to plant this is a terrible way to say this because it's overwrought, but like, just plant a little seed, pour a little water on, and like actually trust the process happening in the lives of people who are reading what I'm doing, who are listening to it's what's going on in you that matters. So limiting that was, yes, it was a discipline for me. So I'd stop talking so much. It was a way to meet people where they're at, because people consume things more that way. But really, it's about trusting the people I'm trying to talk to and the work that's already happening in their lives, and just being a small part of it. And instead of thinking like I can control the damn thing.
As a reader, like, I just see where that gives me so much more room to kind of walk into what you're talking about or what you're saying and fill it in with my own experience or what I'm learning or or what it's speaking to me, as opposed to you kind of like dissecting everything that it should mean
Yep.
to me. So it's attractive to me as a reader because it gives me a chance to be more involved in it. And
Yeah.
but I wonder how that translates to our relationships with others as well.
Yep.
You know, like how much are we filling up the space too much and it doesn't give them room. And so I've got one of your books here.
Okay,
And
cool.
and I love your may eyes.
Yeah.
They're kind of prayers, they're kind of reflections.
Yeah.
But you've got one I'd love to hear you expand a little bit on
Okay.
what this means to our relationships with others. You said, may I have enough faith in the truth that I
Ooh.
happily abandon the temptation to sell it.
Yeah.
That's a good yeah.
So the place that comes from personally is, I mean, I helped pastor church for 20 years. And this is going to go right back to the conversation we were just having. If I have to convince you of the truth of something, what I mostly mean by that, by convincing you of the truth of something, is I've probably talked you into something you haven't naturally come to. And there can be some value to that if we're talking about kids, like we're talking about children. And but even that, like if you tell your kids, like listen, you know, if you touch the stove, or if you know, whatever on your bike, you can tell someone that, but it's really like, it's when you actually touch the stove, it's when you eat it on your bike. It's like, my propensity is, because I love people, and I do, like, I really love people, I want you to know the truth about your life, about God, about relationships. I want you to know the truth. But if I have to convince you of something, that either I might be missing what's actually true about your life, and I'm injecting something. So I'm just like, I'm selling you this thing. I'm acting like Pepsi or Nike. It's like, this is the thing you want. And yeah, like that's less fruitful in someone's life. If the truth in relationship is of value, it is of value because it adds clarity to the life you're living. And my propensity has historically been to muddy that process up by trying to tell you what I think is true about you, and it doesn't grow out of your own soul. You'll believe me, and that's fine. But as an adult, I have to believe me. I have to believe me. Like, believing you for a season, like, is super important. Maybe because I'm, let's just say, 24 and stupid, because I was, and weren't we all? And I had to believe other people. In the long run, I have to believe what's going on in me. I have to believe myself. And I don't want to try to convince people of those things in the long run. That's really where that comes from. It's like, I want to, here's what I think is happening. I'm going to plant these seeds in relationship and community. I'm going to do what I can, storytelling, and tell as best as I can the truth. But really, it's what's going on in you that actually counts. And I don't want to try to sell that.
So that kind of ties into something I've been thinking about too, and pieces that I've read and parts I've listened to of you in the past. You know, we all start life with somewhat of a, you know, we have an identity, but our parents impart a lot of our identity in our youth, right? Who we are, and kind of at least a springboard for our identity. You had a difficult path, I would say. You seem to really, in your midlife now, so you've had some time, but you've reconciled that, and it seems to be a piece of you that you've really used, right? John and I talked before you were on about not focusing on why is this happening to me, right? More about what am I doing with it, right? Like shifting from why did it happen to me? Okay, well, it happened to me.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do with it? So could you kind of share about that part of your life? And
yeah. So I had a pretty positive, for the most part, upbringing, at least early. Like, I had both my parents into my 20s. A lot of folks don't. And they're both pretty great people. My mom's still around. In my mid-20s, early to mid-20s, I lost my dad to depression, to suicide. And he was a guy who, and there's a lot to be said here about like what depression actually is and all that, but he was pretty well convinced by the environment around him that he was, and this is cliche now because we talk a lot about it, which is good and bad.
Right.
He was convinced that the dominant value of his life was what he could produce, that was like he could financially provide, like all the things that like attack men at like sort of our like our core emotions. Like I want to provide, I want to make an impact in the world, I want to do something positive. All these things are really good. He really deeply identified with those things, and when his, at least for a moment, when he was not for a season capable of providing the way he wanted to provide, of caring for me the way he wanted to care for me, and making the impact culturally with work that he was making, he lost himself and ended up like he used a handgun and killed himself. That marked me in a number of ways. One, like I really, really resonated with him. Like I always did. Like I love my mom, and she and I are very, very similar. I really get though the drive. Like my mom's a caretaker. Like like hardcore caretaker. She'll love you to death. My dad was someone who once he bought the vision for something, like he was gonna put the hours in to make it happen. You want to make a neighborhood? We moved into a neighborhood. My dad wanted to have neighbors because they had never had neighbors. Both my parents grew up in like dirt poverty, like legit actual poverty. Like my mom lived in 17 homes between the age of 12 and 18. My dad didn't know most of his family. Alcoholism, workaholism, like does like has no core memories of like, or had no core memories of like where they lived. Like doesn't remember addresses like through like up into his teen years. Like it was bad. So when they moved into a neighborhood, my dad was like, we're gonna have neighbors. And so my dad was the guy who like planned parties. And so by the time I was in my my preteen years, there were like 4 or 5 parties throughout the course of the year. The whole neighborhood would come out. It was because my dad would organize and execute that stuff. Same thing. He would show up at like all of his work environments as a guy who like might have graduated high school. We don't really know. Went to the Navy, like just worked his way up the ladder because he would show up and he would like execute, and he would like, what needs to be done, let's get it done, and then let's push just beyond that. So the folks Seth Godin talks about becoming someone who's indispensable. My dad was always the person who was indispensable. He was the guy who's like, oh, thank God John's here doing this, making the neighborhood party work, making the business better. He super deeply identified with his capacity to make things happen. I really get that. So when that snuck up behind him and convinced him of the things it convinced him of, it shook me to reevaluate how I saw my dad. So like a lot of dudes, my dad was a hero figure in my life. Like, not that he could do no wrong, but if that man could be taken down,
right,
like that, wow,
right,
like what on earth could have like undone this Goliath? This like what could have undone him? And I've spent a lot of years since then unpacking not just, again, this is part of the truth, and not just what was true actually about him, but like what am I going to do with the legacy he passed on to me? Because I can't just stand back here and admire it and be like, well, what a great guy, I hope I get to honor him with my life. There are things in here for me to learn. Like I want to live that way, but I don't want to live entirely that way. So I spent a lot of time unpacking, like, is there an end to like the drive to make things great? Like, is there a limit to that? Like, how do I do that well? Is that like, what are the things? Do I pay attention to my weaknesses and like try to like work just on my strengths? So there's a lot that comes with that story.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I think again, as a man, I'm 44. How old are you? I don't know.
50. I'll be 50 at the end of the year.
Yeah,
I'm starting to say 50 now, so I'm used to
you
it
just
by the
get
time
used
it
to it.
actually happens.
Yeah, but I think it's one of those things in a man's life, right, where I thought you kind of dealt with um, all the issue of who your dad is, who am I, what's the truth in it, how to honor like the legacy. That's all done with in your youth, right? As kind of how I preface the conversation, right?
Yeah.
They kind of shape it when you're young, and it's a springboard, and you're good when you're in your adult years. But it really does affect. I think for me in this season of life, it's affected me more now than when I
Yeah.
was 24.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
those are the conversations I'm having. Is it's like this second undoing, and I always saw it as, oh, midlife. Maybe this is like part of that midlife crisis, right? Which seems so simplified and kind of it's oh, get a fast sports car and a side chick. That's so simple, but that was like the caricature I had of
Yeah,
midlife,
totally.
right? Like,
No, it's way
oh,
worse. It's way worse than that.
It
It
might
is
uh,
include that, but
like
yes.
that
right,
is, yeah,
but
existential crisis or get a sports car. Take your
Yes.
pick.
yeah, but
Exactly.
all that to say is it's like this second. I feel like I'm 18 again, 16 to 18 when you're kind of changing a lot, but in a different way, right? Of
Yep.
unpacking all of this legacy and the
Well,
impact. And
you move from the classroom emotionally into the field. Like it's literally, I mean, the sports analogy, you move from like watching game film
mm,
and like breaking down like this is, and then actually like being like on the field looking at a defense and being like,
I
oh
like
wait,
that.
crap. Like it's a completely different experience. Like it's one thing, like I'm doing the quarterback thing here, like it's one thing to like look at the game film, watch the way the defense is set up, but the camera's at this angle, you can see the entire field. It's a completely different thing when you're actually under center and you're looking out of the defense.
Yeah,
And where you thought the linebacker was, like, did they shift or did I get that wrong? And then the game is always moving faster than it does when you're watching from altitude. Literally is the difference. Like
yeah,
you come to the end of one's adolescence. That's what adolescence is for most of us, is other people for the most part telling us where to stand, what to do. You come to the end of your adolescence and suddenly in adulthood, like you're not watching game film anymore. You are quite literally the one under center. You're the one who's going to call the play. And like the game moves faster than it did like when you were watching the film. And it is a completely different learning experience because there the and some of this is true and some of it is not. Because when you're a kid, even if you're a kid into your early 30s, which some people are, um, the consequences for your actions have only so much ramification, and you can still move home with your parents or something.
right, right.
Like there's still like there's if you blow it, you've got this and this, you've got some fallback. By the time like you own the house and your kids are watching, and like and you're more isolated because you're not surrounded by this is so many of us, you're not surrounded by a community of friends who are constantly cheering you on because you don't spend 3 nights a week around your social club anymore the way you did when you were 24. Like now you're more alone, there's more to lose, there seems to be more at stake. Like that's a very, very different experience of choices and consequences. When there's a story in I think I sent you a digital copy of the book I'm dropping in May. And there's this story about my dad and I. He invited me his first like adult job. He started this thing. It was a consolidation firm for air travel. So it was like in a way it was a little bit like what Expedia
Mm,
does, where like he would quite like there's no internet back in the day. Like he would develop relationships with travel agents in the area, and then he would consolidate like these are the best deals with these particular airlines, and people could just come to M&H Travel, my dad's thing, and like figure out what the best deals were. Like he was just doing that, like, but like it was a great idea, like way the hell back before you could do it online. So he was building this thing, and he knew that it was important, and he knew he was really excited about it, and he was completely by himself. Like, he didn't have anyone. He's like out on his own. This sounds familiar to so many of us. Has a great idea, doesn't have a team yet. He's gonna. So I'm young and stupid. Like, I'm probably, gosh, I don't know, like 14 maybe at the time of the story. So he's like, he's gonna go set up his office. So I'm in the office helping my dad put together like these envelopes, and he's going to mail out all these envelopes to all these like bigwig business folks in the travel industry. Like, I've started this thing, I'm going to try to revolutionize the way we do ticketing, blah blah blah. And I'm just being a kid, right? I'm looking stamps and bam, bam, and all the stamps are like crooked all over and my dad like comes in, he gives me a simple task. He comes in, he sees like the stack of envelopes, they're like, it's a mess. And he didn't like lose it, but like he immediately was like he said, damn it, and like freaked out, grabbed them all from me. He would, because like he's out, like, it's one thing to have the idea as a young person, I want to try this new thing, but for him to like go out on a limb and like start this business on his own, and he doesn't have anybody. He's got his son. He's trying to include his son in this thing, and I'm like putting stamps on it like it's some stupid school project.
Yeah.
What my dad wanted to do is he wanted to build something that was going to sustain his life and sustain our sustain our family. He had banked on the idea, like, because he wasn't wrong that I'd done something stupid.
Right.
That was dumb. That's not wrong. But what freaked him out wasn't like my son did a dumb thing. What freaked him out was that he had convinced himself and was convinced that what was going to matter, that the real ball game was to build something that's going to last, build something that's immovable, build something that's ultimately build something that's going to last forever. Like, that was the thing. You build a thing, you build a business, it takes care of your life, long term. What I've come to, this is part of the learning curve that we talked about a minute ago, is you never really get to do that. You never really get to build anything that lasts. Nothing you build will ever actually last long term. What will always matter, always, and this sounds so cliche and so silly, but it's actually true. What will always matter are the relationships you develop with the people you build it with, the relationships you forge if the thing works. Because if the thing works, it won't be the product that actually matters. It'll be the connections that product helps forge between people. It'll always be about the relationships. And so he was right to be frustrated that I was doing it poorly. But he was missing the point that, like, though I know this now, I mean, I was his kid.
Right.
Like, the most important thing in the moment wasn't that he was going to get this business off the ground. It doesn't exist anymore. The business doesn't exist anymore, but I do. Like, I was the most important thing in the moment. And instead of like being like, damn it, and then taking all the things away from me, it could have been like, hey, listen, this is going to cost me about $75 to fix, but let me tell you what we're doing and why we're doing it this way. Like, that could have been the moment.
Right.
Because I was the thing that was important. Though you never get to build the thing that lasts, you get to develop relationships with the products that you build, with the ideas that you have. These are some of the things I've learned about, like, okay, like, these things matter, but they matter because the relationships in them matter, not because the thing you're building matters.
Oof. Yeah, that really requires some mindfulness. It requires a lot of work, right? to get to a place where you're not triggered by things like that in a way.
Yep.
I mean, the secondary part is your success of your business requires people opening these envelopes and having confidence that you're legitimate and you have entrusted a 14-year-old. So that's worth saying as well.
But, true.
But you know what you're describing, what your dad did, and I've found myself many times reacting to things in the moment, triggered by something, and what's inside comes out without a lot of filter or a lot of thoughtfulness. Do you have any suggestions for, like, something Sean and I want to do better and help people do better is to live mindfully, live thoughtfully of the people around us, and to kind of slow things down so that we can respond rather than just react to people. What are your suggestions or thoughts on that? What's helped you be better at that?
Yeah. So my personal journey begins with like I have the same basic, like I said, basic DNA, same emotional structure as my dad. So like the things I do matter. I have that quick temper, like I'll just sort of snap at stuff. So the one is like having the humility, knowing my history, and knowing that injury happens, knowing that my mistakes cost other people, having the humility to go to folks and say, okay, so specifically people I've hurt, namely my kids, or people who are working with me, going and saying, here's why I was ticked, and here's what matters in that moment, and breaking it down. The humility to first and foremost apologize for things, but also like recast a vision. So if someone does step on my toes, and like I'm running a thing, it does matter. Like I'd like them to nail this thing, but here's why. Like it's and to sort of reinvite them in the vision. That's primary. So having the humility to actually prioritize the people around me and the relationships developing. The other one is, for me personally, the practice of Sabbath keeping. So I 52 days a year, I don't work. Everything I do matters. Everything, and I've been independent in all my business dealings since 1999. So like if I'm not working, no one's working. And I take 52 days a year I pull them off the calendar and I'm not working, which literally slows my pace down so that I have more perspective on my life. Like you don't just get it. You don't just like think your way into having more perspective. You have to practice your way into having more perspective. So if we're talking about altitude and we're talking about pace, man, literally everything is like sports. Everything is like, no joke. Like you have to practice your way into that. If your throwing motion is not right, you can't think your way into throwing the ball differently. Like you can't. You have to practice your way into it. So what Sabbath keeping does is it takes for me like some of the most important stuff I get to do with my time. Like I love my jobs. I love the stuff I do. It's some of the most important stuff I get to do. And it contextualizes that in the context of a life that's bigger than work. The only way for me to get there is by not doing that work. So Sabbath keeping has been super key to that. I was on this is another story from the same book. I could tell the big long version of it at some point, but like I ended up at this retreat for artists, and the guy running the retreat said to all these artists in the room, said, I'm gonna assume if you're here, it's because you love what you do. Everyone nods. He says, if you want to love what you do and do what you love long term, you're gonna have to learn to not do it, because the most burned out people I know are people who love what they do, and cannot stop. And it is a really dark place to resent the things you love. It's like, oh, damn. Because that thing that I love doing will eventually, just like my dad, it'll steal life from me. And now I'm in this like weird contentious relationship with loving works in my life. So in order to really reduce the pace of my life, in order to have altitude, in order to do the things I love, I Sabbath keep 52 days a year. I pull work off the calendar.
Yeah. That's key. I've been working for myself for 14 years now, and you're right. I mean, it's when you're in that space doing something you love, your life and work are kind of really connected, right? There's no clear delineation between one and the other, and part of that's on purpose, right? I want my family to love the community my work is in building, right?
Yep.
But so it's not an easy thing, but it is critical. I think that is that's invaluable to really set up those kind of firm parameters, because what you love can turn on you.
100%. Yeah. And it's a pitfall, because you get into you start passion projects and they just feel great.
Right.
But it's it's like that, you know, it's like that fiery relationship. Like, I'm sure that feels great at the very beginning,
Yeah.
but also like all your bros aren't wrong when they're like, dude, you've disappeared. Like, you like, you're like, I'm
Right.
sure she's awesome, but like, we haven't seen you in 3 weeks.
Right.
So there's something about that as well, that like, it'll, the thing we care about, the things that we're most drawn by, still need to be contextualized by like a whole life. And really the only way to contextualize our lives is by removing ourselves from the things that dictate our schedules, removing ourselves from the things that like we, you know, most care about or feel most responsible to.
Yeah.
So that the stuff I do is always smaller than who I am.
So, I mean, you guys are both entrepreneurs, you're both creatives. So I just want to translate this for a moment for the
Yeah.
Right.
non-artist,
Get it.
non-creatives, I get to pursue my passions. People that are out there working as a slave to the corporate industrial complex.
Yep.
Because it doesn't listen to you when you say, I just need some time to self-actualize.
Yeah.
So
Nope.
Yeah, I mean, I've found that, like you've said, you've got to practice things to become, to
Yeah.
change, right? Like, it's not just like saying I'm not going to be like my dad for 20 years is not going to make you different than your dad.
Correct.
And hyper focusing on that will probably just make you continue to be like it. But yeah, I mean, there's some thing I've found it forcing myself to schedule things that are personally helpful, right? Like, as far as internally, it's easy to schedule things that are like externally helpful,
Yeah.
like exercise, or working on side projects, or even like home projects. But to if you want to live in a space where your mind and your heart are slowed down, like you said, you've got to slow down, or at least make spaces where you do slow down, whether
Mm-hmm.
that be like a personal retreat time or just going for a walk. I
Yeah.
think the virtues of going for a walk have
Huge.
been greatly lost by men. I think women go on walks together, or they'll just take time apart. But I think as men, I think we need to do that more. Any other practices you have that would be more, adaptable for people that aren't in that space where they're creating their own schedules?
Oh, well, yeah. The pushback here would be like, so the machinery. What was the description you gave? Just a second.
Corporate industrial complex. It's one of
There
my.
it is.
It's second to my favorite phrase of the last decade, which is religious industrial complex. But
God
that's
bless them.
that's another podcast.
They're really similar.
They are so
They're
similar.
so similar. It might be the same problem. So the reason that monstrosity wins is because it keeps a calendar, and it forces its calendar on you. And you're not wrong. Like, you don't get to just say like, well, I've decided to make Tuesdays my self-actualization day, and so to hell with your meetings. Like, you don't always get to do that. Some of us do. I would say that part of why those monstrosities win is because they convince us that we lack the power that we do have. You're not wrong. Like, yeah, like, you're supposed to be there at 8 and then you leave at 4 or 5, and like, that's on the calendar. But we get convinced, and we believe that we relinquish the actual power that we do have. So yes, the monster has a calendar and it forces itself on you 100%. Not to be a huge jerk about it, but like, one, you did sign up for it. So like, that's it's still a choice you made. And it's not a choice, just a bit of altitude. It's not a choice to walk away. Some of us should, from some of the jobs we have. The bigger part of it, though, is this. And you talk about like scheduling walks or scheduling exercise. The fact that I have a calendar available to me on which like this monstrosity of the business or whatever, we don't have, it's not all negative. Like, my work life has taken up this chunk. I still get to look at my calendar. I still get to make power moves. I still get to decide what I do with my time on these days. And so actually sitting down, looking at my calendar and mapping stuff out over the course of like months, because the business knows what it's doing next year. So I should probably head some of that stuff off at the past and say, well, here's a weekend I'm not available, and like plan that out 8 months ahead of time. Plan that out, like the whether that's like exercise patterns or the vacation thing I want to go on, or like that personal trip. Maybe it is your self-actualization day. You're like, I'm gonna go to the spa, like whatever your thing is, bro. You go jump on the hot springs, bless your heart. But like to actually use the calendar to defend myself against the onslaught of like other things telling me what to do all the time. I can't do that between 8 and 4 if I'm being told where to be and where to stand. But I can probably point 9 months out and say, here's a weekend, here's a day, and use my calendar to defend the time to protect my own soul. That's a super key discipline. To take that list of passion projects or take that list of like desired things that you just do that are enjoyable, and actually plug them into the calendar like they're serious things and not just stuff that gets to slip in between my obligations.
Yeah.
That changes things.
Yeah, and being accountable to those. One of my favorite lines from a Neil Young song that hits me with that is when he says, tell me, why is it hard to keep arrangements with yourself?
Yeah, man.
I'll show up for Sean. I'll show up for you if we have an appointment. But if I have an appointment with myself, it's easy for me to blow it off.
And it's what the calendar, it's what the calendar does. It's what the calendar can train us to do. Is like, I have an appointment with it's on the calendar, and I get the reminder the same way I get a reminder about something else. I get the reminder, it's on the calendar. I'm not great at just like deciding, like it's, I shouldn't be left to my own devices because like, I'm going to decide what to do with my time and moment to moment to moment. I'm much better if I with envision. Oh, here's like this is all the stuff. Like yesterday I had like kind of this brain dump of like, this is the stuff I need to and want to do. So what'll happen tomorrow, because it's a Friday, is that I look through this list and I get on my calendar and I start plugging this crap in. And then I make all these agreements with myself so that this is what I'm doing and this is when I'm doing it. And now the calendar will tell me in a healthier pace and pattern that, yes, this is the day you get to do this thing. This is the day this is happening. So it's easier to keep an arrangement with my calendar than it is just with my own little sub psychologist in my brain.
Yeah. I think you said something important in there that I don't want to brush over. And that is, if you do want to grow personally, if you don't want to be the person that your father or whoever was, if you want to be a better dad, you want to be a better partner, that requires some choices, and you do have autonomy to make a lot of these choices. And one of them is your job and your career. And you know, changing jobs in order to have more personal time or to have a healthier life, yes, that's very possible. And we had Rob Murray on a few episodes ago, and he was talking about, the excuse we always use is, well, I got to provide for my family, I got to provide for my kids. And he's like, let's just quit BSing. Like, you could probably provide making about 30% less than what you do.
100%.
And stop using that as the excuse to not change the job or to not make more time, or, let's be honest about it. And you're just not willing to sacrifice that for this other thing.
And the fact that it's a hard thing doesn't mean it's impossible. So know the difference. Is that hard? My God, that's hard. It's so hard. It's much harder later down the line to undo the damage we've done to our bodies, to our psychology, to our kids' understanding and perspective on like what happiness is. Like that's harder than it is to like change jobs in your early 40s. It is harder without question. And we sentimentalize these things, and bless Hallmark for doing the job they've done to make us feel good about things at times. But we do sentimentalize these things when we talk about like, you're the gift you're offering your family, like your provision. I mean, I've written over and over about this. It's like, like I said, I'll turn 50 this year. I've got a 12-year-old boy, and a 6-year-old girl. Would I trade, like all, like the freedom I had as a kid, because my dad made not great money, but he made good enough money, and like we had a house. Would I trade like some of those comforts now? Like where like I had to work, if I had to work during high school, because I didn't. Like my parents were like, listen, we don't want you to work while you're in high school. I got a paper out anyways because I was trying to buy things for myself. But like if I had to work, if I had to make those sacrifices, would I trade that in order to have him here so that he could know my freaking kids
Mm,
in a minute? Not, it
Mhm.
wouldn't even, I wouldn't even think, I wouldn't blink like
Yeah.
any of it. Like, hey, Justin, you don't get to go on Young Life staff and like make $800 a month, idiot. Because you want to, serve God like right out of college instead of get a job that makes actually, actual money. You don't get to do that. Okay. If would I trade that for having my dad around to like watch me sign book contracts and write stories? Like 100% without even blinking. So we sentimentalize those things until it's an actual reality in our lives, is that
yeah.
you really do have only so many years on the planet. And yes, we can feel trapped by some of the bigger choices we made, but they are still choices we've made
Mhm.
to work the way we've worked, to live where we live, to have the third damned TV in the house. Like, these are decisions we've made, and we can undo them. There, you do have power, and you do have autonomy.
Yep.
Mm, yeah.
And as you said, it's not easy. It's hard, but choose your hard. That's one of my favorite
Choose your hard.
sayings over the last few years is, yeah, I mean, downsizing, taking a job where you like make less money is hard. But also, having 3 stints put in your heart and your kids resent you because you were never around and working all the time, even though they
That's
had
harder.
everything they always wanted. It's a little harder, right?
It's much harder.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
always.
Can I hijack one other question I have
Go.
for Justin here? Sean's
Yeah.
like, when do I get to talk?
No,
Uh,
it's fine.
I got one more. I'd like to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah,
Uh,
please.
this is may I cease to be annoyed that others are not as I wish they were, since I am not as I wish I was.
Yeah. Easily irritable person. I am. And living in relationship with people. No, I'll give you more of the actual story. So about 47 seconds that direction, if I'm running at a decent pace, are like neighbors who are like dear friends. When I was offered jobs to leave California to like go live in Texas or Nashville, like they were why I didn't, like in my 20s, like they were why I didn't,
Mm,
because I wanted to live around these people. When we've moved once, I'm just like my parents in this way. Like my mom still lives in the same house as she bought in 1976 because she'd never owned anything. Neither did my dad. Bought one house and she's like, I'm done. We moved one time and we only moved because everyone else moved in the same neighborhood. I'm like, great, fine, let's figure this out. Um, when knowing and loving and being loved by the same smallish group of men, particularly, has educated me in this, that 99% of the time, if I'm annoyed with you, it has at least some to do with expectations that I have, which are mostly predicated on weaknesses and needs that I have. So if you're pissing me off, it's not just because you're a prick. It's because I'm particularly irritated in these particular ways, which has to do with like the way my soul is shaped. And I only know that because I have these really dear, loving, very truth-telling dudes who are like, bro, you bitch about this all the time. That's because it's your thing. Oh, so my irritations are still my irritations. And do I want things to change in the world around me? For sure. Absolutely. But almost all the time, if I'm ticked off by something, it says so much about me and the ways I need to change. And it's that ends up being reciprocal. Hopefully the other people around you feel the same. But that's been a really I'm thinking of like 6 or 7 different stories right now. That's been a really good hard lesson to learn. It's not just a lesson in humility, it's a lesson in relationship and care. Like, I'm irritated with you because I have things I want and need and expect. And so I'm kind of projecting a lot of the time.
I feel like that ties into that first may I that we talked about feeling
Yes.
like I don't have to sell people on the truth or what I think the truth is or what I think they should do or who
Yeah.
they should be. And it's
Yeah.
very like, man, it just like gives you a lot more peace when you're not trying to micromanage the lives of others, right?
you get to receive people as they are and be received as you are and be okay with the fact that, like, you have next steps. It's everything is Bob Dylan, right? Bob Dylan's 67 records or something along those lines. 67, which is insane.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle there, like record 26 or 27, I think, he wrote Blood on the Tracks, which is one of the greatest song written records in all of music history. But he made 30 records after that, because what made Bob Dylan great was not just his capacity to write great songs, because he was always committed to his next step. Always. Like, there was going to be another record. I mean, he's 466 years old right now, and he's still going to make another record. But like, he was always committed to a next step, and that's what made him a great artist. I think that's what makes great men, is that we are committed to our process long term, and we're committed to our next steps, and that we have the humility to receive that we're not done yet.
Bam. I think that was perfectly scripted for an ending.
Amen.
But so your new book is coming out. We'll post the link in the show notes, but
Cool.
how many is this for you? How many books are you on?
6. Well, depending on how you count
Wow.
it, 7. But because there was one that we did independently that then we also like reorganized and pitched to Penguin. So it's kind of 7, but it's really 6.
Wow. That's awesome, man. So is each one your favorite, or is it a whole different canvas, right?
Which ones do you hate?
I do. I actually hate I hate the first one. Like, just like I hate my first record, like I hate the first book. Like, mainly because I look at it, I'm like, oh, I could have done all of that so much better.
It's your shitty first draft.
It's the shitty first draft, and it's just that I published the shitty first draft.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well,
But tell us about this new one.
yeah.
Sure. The book is called Sacred Strides, and it ties into a lot of stuff we're in that in this conversation that has to do with legacy, has to do with happiness. It's about work, rest, rhythm, but not just so that I can like develop a good rhythm between work and rest, but so that I could live a peaceful and beloved life. That I don't want to try to find balance between work and rest. I feel very alive as someone who works. I'm a fan of like hustle and hustle culture. Huge. Let's roll. Let's do stuff. I'm also a fan of the contemplative tradition. Like, let's take a step back and like get altitude on my life. I think both things are I don't want to say like equally true. They're both true. In fact, the way Parker Palmer says is that like action and contemplation are both rooted in the same place, and they return us to the same place, which has to do with belovedness. If I know that I'm loved by the world around me, by the people around me, by God, then I can work my ass off when I want to work and offer myself completely, and I can step away from that work and still be okay, or quit my damn job if I want to and be beloved regardless. Contemplation and action are rooted in the same place, and they return us to the same place. So it's a book, 16 or 17 stories of my journey to recognize my own belovedness in the context of both rest and work.
I hear a little Richard Rohr in there somewhere.
There's a little Rohr in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, in the words of Stephen Garber, we should take a walk sometime.
Amen.
I feel like we have a lot more to talk about with you and to hear
Absolutely
from you. But thank you so much for this time today. We do a little thing called After the Interview, where Sean and I get together and talk about all the things that we wish we'd talk to you about, and
Cool.
the things that stood out to us. So you've got to tune into the podcast to hear that. But thank you everybody else for joining us. Thank you, Justin. And we'll be back in about 15 seconds.
My pleasure.
Welcome back to After the Interview. And since I monopolized most of the conversation on this podcast, I will kick it to Sean for his initial thoughts on After the Interview.
You know what? I disagree with that, John. I don't think you did. And I didn't even feel like you did. And I think if you listen back, you won't think you did either. But no, Justin, I wish we had more time. There's definitely going to be a round 2 with him. He is just such a gifted storyteller and communicator. And I just really like who he is. I felt like we just scratched the surface, but there was quite a few little gems in there that I thought were worthwhile in reflecting on, especially the part of, I have to believe what's going on in me, right? Before I try to convince other people of what the truth is, right? Whatever that truth is. And I think confirmation bias is real in all of our lives, right? Whether it's, doesn't matter, whatever we're looking for or struggling with, we kind of want other people to confirm it first before we land on it internally, and so whether that's what he intended or not, I think doing that work without, sure, other people can help you process your journey, but we love proselytizing, and I'm that way, right? With fitness, you're probably so sick of me posting, things about how important fitness is, but I think that's a really good practice, right? Do I believe me?
Mm-hmm.
It's simple, but kind of profound, right? Like, do you believe you? Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yeah, I think sometimes the things we're the most defensive about or the most aggressive about are the things that we feel the most insecure about. That's just my psychoanalysis, maybe, but I feel like those things we feel the most secure about and certain of and at peace with, we can be more relaxed about, right? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just a maturity thing over time of,
right.
Like over time you become more, I don't know if you just become more lazy or tired or you become more wise. I think there's a fine line between all of that. I do think part of what we get credited with maturity on is just not having the energy to do the stupid things we used to do. But you know what I'm saying? Like over time you begin to see your own journey of enthusiasm and then see it kind of like level out, and then you kind of can more peacefully let other people have their own journey and encourage them along the way, but not feel like you've got it, they need to get where you are or believe what you believe immediately, and all of that.
Another simple thing, you love application. I don't know, we're 6 episodes in or something now, but you always ask for the application, which is good because I never, I'm too lost in the conversation. But when he said about honoring your calendar, I think that's so true, right? And kind of controlling the power you do have. Their calendar is a year in advance, so exercise that power too and honor it. I think that's really important. You pointed it out. Not all of us work for ourselves and have the ability to kind of create our calendars, but he mentioned choices too. And in a previous podcast, we talked about it, but I think, and I had my family in town this weekend and we talked about that in length, right? What options do we have? How many choices do we have? How did you end up here? Right? You weren't just placed here, wherever you're at, you made choices to end up there. So you can make choices to shift that. So I think those two things are really critical for people to feel empowered, right? The worst thing you can do that's a joy killer or the vision killer or to kill your creativity is to say you're powerless, right? Whether it's your vocation or your relationship, and nothing can change, and it's just not true. the process out of it may be painful and have a high cost, but you still have a choice to make a change of direction, right? And I think we want power without the pain, you know, like we want to have choices that are only good, right? They benefit us. And the power could be in, there's gonna be a lot of painful choices to shift direction and grow, but freedom's on the other side, or more freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything has an opportunity cost, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, I mean, if you're choosing to shift your job to where you're somewhere that you're more flexible or have more family time or have more autonomy, or I would say have more work for a leadership that respects you and your boundaries and
Yeah.
respects your relationship with your family, you might be making less money. You might
Yeah.
not be living in the house or sending your kid to the private school or whatever. But man, like I think if you look down the road and you look back and you look at like what you really want to develop with your
Right.
family and in your life, and then reverse engineer it, I think it makes sense, right? I think it becomes
Yeah.
easier to make those choices. There was something that I wish I'd mentioned that I've shared with you that a friend of mine said, and that is that he said when his child is born, he imagines a grid with 18 squares on it, because when that child is born, at the most, he's going to have 18 summers with that child.
Mm-hmm.
18. That's not a lot. And the
Right.
first 4 or 5 don't really count.
Right. Right.
And so, what are you going to do with those? Like, are you going to take the trips? Are you going to visit every major league ballpark? Are you going to hit national parks? Are you going to carve out time and invest in time together? Or are you just going to let it fly by and think, I wish I would have put that on my calendar?
Yeah.
So yeah, the
Yeah.
calendar rules the world, right? Rules your life.
Yeah. When he talked about, his dad committing suicide when he was 24, that was, he's like, he was essentially let down because he was trying to build something for us, right? That didn't work out, but he forgot that 14-year-old kid with the stamps, is still going to be around, and that business is long gone. Yeah. I mean, it's simple, right? These aren't complex in nature,
Yeah.
but they require intention and commitment, right? I think that's a big thing. It's very easy to be distracted as life progresses, and what you think is necessary or what needs are, but the equation actually isn't that complex.
I think
When
this
you
would be a
step back.
great opportunity for a PSA for therapy, as if I don't mention it enough. But I would say, like, if you're listening to this, and we all have our different reasons that we don't make the right choices. Sometimes it's because we're people pleasers and we don't want to upset our boss. We don't want to disappoint our boss by leaving and going somewhere else. We don't feel like we have a voice to speak up and set our boundaries and say, this is what we want. Um, Fear of lack of provision. Maybe your whole life your parents never had enough, and so you're like overcompensating. Whatever our reasons are, we all have our reasons. But it's really, really helpful to have somebody help you think through those reasons and work
Mm.
through them to where you're not bound by them, and they're not determining your future, right? It's like, deal with your past, or your past will deal you your future. That's
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
reality of it. So I would just encourage you, if you're hearing all this, you're going, man, I really want those things, and I don't know how to get out of this pattern of not making those things happen. I would look into finding somebody to help you do that.
Yeah. And the last thing, is that it was at the end of it. So kind of, we all just heard this, but he was saying that great men, people are committed to the process for the long term.
Hmm.
That is true as well. And I think maybe because it hit home for me, right? Like the idea that you know I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but someone had and I've heard it a few times, like, oh yeah, you're so kind of fortunate and lucky to live such a crazy life, right? and and I'm like, first of all, you don't know all the bad days and bank account balances and stresses involved, but um to me it is this being committed to the process, right? Like, I know what drives me, I know my why, and I have since I was 18, really, and I'm just committed to it, right? And I've made decisions that are in alignment with that, um when it doesn't make sense to a lot of other people. So maybe I just found comfort in it, hearing it from someone else again. Because especially, when we talked about midlife and, the QB going from the tape room to be, behind the center, it looks a whole lot different. It's a lot faster, but still I find rest in that, just I've been committed to the process for so long. Um, that it is true, right? All the other kind of distractions and fears are generally external, but they're not real. Um, and they don't really hold the weight of why you're doing what you're doing. And they only short circuit you or make you kind of react out of emotion. And then you're kind of more lost. Right. So, and I don't think he meant great men are committed to the process. Like great men, I think great men, he's just like men that are solid, you know, or men that are, I don't know. Did I hear that wrong, or am I projecting
I know. I
myself
don't know
onto
that he
that?
said great men, but he said it's important to be. And so he talks about the process. You talk about the process all the time. I've heard you mention the process. I think it's a fair question to ask for everyone and myself. When you say the process, what do you mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I think being committed to the process for me is being consistent over the long term in my relationships and in why I'm doing it, right? That's the process. It's like a consistency in my approach to it. It's not this constant uh I don't know who I am, right? My compass isn't spinning, right? My compass feels like it's on track. And so I know if I treat people a certain way in the space I want to create for those people, that's the process for me, right? And being consistent and committed to that, for the long term. The money may increase or decrease, but my commitment to that process of making people feel known, create spaces that are grounding and foundational in the community. That's what I'm committed to and trying to be consistent in. So I
That
think that's,
reaffirms to me that this goes back to our last podcast. I think that we should really do one of these on helping people create their own mission statements and why statements.
yeah,
And because that is that compass of, and it helps you make decisions, right? Like,
yeah,
okay, well, this is a great business opportunity, but does it really fulfill my why? Does it really,
yeah,
am I using my time, energy, resources towards something that's achieving my ultimate goal, not just to make more money?
yeah. When you're committed to the process too, I think I quickly know when something isn't right. So whether it's an opportunity or something else, it just doesn't sit right. So if you're committed to what you know to be your process, your path, your why, you can quickly filter out
Mhm.
opportunities or distractions, and that's helpful. Yeah, but that was pretty much it for me. That was a quick, I think it was 40 minutes with Justin. We were on a little bit of a time crunch, but yeah.
Yeah, if we have a second go with Justin, I would love to delve more into this idea that we touched on of how our fathers embody both things we want to be and things we don't want to be. And
Mm,
as an evolving man, how do you sort through that, and how do you process that, and learn to let go of, or to grow beyond those ways that you don't want to be? And how do you gravitate towards those things you do want to be. And as someone who's in that final stage of life with my father, I understand how over time you begin to focus more on those things about them. You know, at nobody's funeral do you ever hear everyone give a laundry list of all the things that annoyed them about that person. Right.
Right.
I really would like to see an honest funeral.
Oh, so would I. Oh, so would I. Yeah.
But you know, I think that's one way of that we grieve, is we kind of let go of the bad and hold on to the good. But what if we did that more while people were alive? And what if we did that with ourselves more? So I'd be curious to delve into that with him a little more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you've hung on this long, thank you. And we do encourage you to please follow, subscribe, like, rate, do all those good things for us. And we look forward to we've got a bunch more of these lined up, and we look forward to sharing them with you. If you have any ideas for us, people that you'd like to hear on the podcast, give us a shout. John at knownexperience.com or Sean at knownexperience.com. Until next time, thank you again, and we hope that you will continue to experience the power of being known.